Please let this be the call to order for the Hillsborough County Internal Audit Committee's February 22nd, 2022 meeting.
I will call the roll. Patty Simmons. Daphne Ullman.
Here.
Cheryl Bursong. James Shepard.
Here.
Chair, you have a quorum. You may start the meeting. So for the second item, public comment, we did not receive any public comment. We might go to the third item.
Is there a motion to approve the minutes from the last meeting? Is there a second?
Second.
James Shepard motioned. Cheryl Bursong seconded to approve the meetings.
I'll go ahead and start the presentation. Okay, great. If you could put up.
We may go with the fourth item. So I'm going to share my screen now.
Okay, great. Thank you all for coming today. I really appreciate it. Thank you very much. For today's meeting, we are going through the quarter ending December 31st, 2021. This is a crossover meeting where we're completing one calendar year audit plan and we're going to be starting a next calendar year audit plan. So you will see a little bit of a change in our presentation today. So the next slide, please. And all of our committee members are here today. Next slide. So the agenda is basically the same agenda as we get each quarter, with the exception of bringing in, folding into it the 22 annual audit plan. Next slide, please. So this risk environment, I did update that when the board had approved the 22 annual audit plan. So this plan here talks a little bit about the risk environment as it was in 21 and carried into 22. And what we found was the highest risk areas for 22 really fall into 5 categories. And those are the COVID-19 response and recovery, organizational personnel changes, technology and cyber resilience, outsourced processes, and recent changes to laws, rules, regulations, and county ordinances. In relation to the COVID-19, the county still remains in a high level of new cases, as you're seeing across the entire United States. We still have programs that are designed to assist citizens as they were affected by job loss or closures. And we're still finding some processes that are shifting from a emergency response to a recovery response. For the organizational personnel changes, we've had a couple personnel changes this last year. We had some reorganization under the county administrators area. We also have, as you're seeing across the whole nation, there are issues with, employee retention and succession planning. And we did experience a little bit of turnover at the top. But I wouldn't call it significant at this point, but there was an increase. One of the other organizational changes we're finding is with the water resource meter reading. That department, what they're doing is they're putting in a new process from when they're actually reading the meter all the way until the invoice gets processed. And they're also changing some of their technology to the advanced metering structure. So that project would probably be completed in 22, possibly into 23, depending on how things changed within the government. All those outside influences. So we would be looking at that probably in 23 or 24. Once it gets implemented, we'll take a look at that for any risks there may be. Next slide, please. For technology, cyber resilience, not a lot of changes from the last quarter. We're still really focusing on that area. Outsourced processes, not a lot of change in that area as well. That's still about the same as last quarter. And recent changes to laws, rules, regulations, county ordinances. One of the things I think that does change from quarter to quarter is those CDC guidelines. But we didn't have a lot of real big other changes to written guiding principles. But the legislation is in session right now, so if there are going to be big changes, probably be within the next quarter. Okay. Next slide, please. So for the trending information, this slide here is the information that I share quite often with the county administrator. We meet on a monthly basis, and I do meet with senior staff as well. Like I said, with the COVID-19, the county is still shifting from an emergency response over to the recovery. For environmental, that's still a very high topic for the county. We are trying very hard to minimize the negative impact to the environment. The business transformation modernization. This is that big Oracle project that we're working on. It's a very large implementation, about 2 years into the making on this one. And we are expecting an item to go to the board in sometime in March that may push that project go live dates from middle of March to the end of September. And then the Oracle, who's the implementer, would be on site probably for another 60 to 90 days to provide technical assistance. Our audit would also go through probably about the end of the year because there are some of our audit steps that will be performed after go live. Okay. The annual risk assessment, you all had taken a look at that during the last quarter, and the board did approve the audit plan per your recommendation. For financial management, again, we just anticipate some budget impact in 22 and 23, and a lot of that's due to the COVID pandemic, the response. We didn't have any major events other than the COVID issues. Technology, we've already talked about that. For the transportation, I think you all know that the court had sided on a class action for the 1 cent transportation tax. The county is still working with the court systems to determine who would be responsible for reimbursing of those collected taxes, and then what timing that would be. But it's still a court decision at this point in time, so I don't really have a big, an update for you all. The organization changes, we went through some of those in the earlier slide, but one of a couple of things here had changed I hadn't mentioned, and that was with the solid waste management. That has been an organization change, and now it's its own department. The MSB or MBE and SBE programs have now been moved as a separate division. And then they also brought the Arts Council of Hillsborough County in underneath the Board of County Commissioners. That had been an independent agency prior to this quarter. And I'm really happy to say that we, as a county, had received 2 awards for the Fleet Management Department. They were recognized as the #1 public fleet for the year. And then also Bob Stein, which is our director, was recognized as the Fleet Manager of the Year. So that's 2 big national awards that we're really happy to have received. Next slide, please. So we didn't have a lot of changes in the last quarter to the 21 annual audit plan, but I'll just kind of go them very quickly. The first one, the vendor master list, that one management had handled on their own. They handled that in-house, so we removed that from our plan. The 2 cone of silence, those when we performed the project, we found out that we did not identify any material issues. Therefore, we didn't have any monitoring for those 2. The property registration activities, the cost analysis, management no longer needed those assistants. They went a different direction on that. And then the last two that are listed here, we moved those to the 22 annual audit plan. So you'll see those in a slide coming up. At this point in time, we don't have any unjustified restrictions or limitations. Everybody's working very well with our department, so we're really happy about that. Next slide, please. So this is the 21 annual audit plan. You've seen that the last 3 quarters, and it had quite a few items on here. Most of these have either been moved, either they're complete, they're in process, or they were moved to the 22, with very few exceptions. So if you go to the next slide, Arabelle. So this is what we're looking at for the 21 annual audit plan. You can see that we have 5 projects from the 21 plan that are still in progress as of the 31st of December, I should say. The Policies and Procedures Manual and Training Program, we expect to have that completed by the end of March, possibly mid-April, but that's really close to being completed. The vertical process monitoring, that's in progress right now, where we've actually made a lot of progress on that. There's still a couple of things that that management is still implementing, excuse me. So there may be a little bit of that we may push off another month or two just to give them a little bit more time if they need it. We'll have more information in the next meeting. The Oracle Cloud implementation, we've talked about that already, how that might be getting pushed out to the end of September. We'll know at the end of the next meeting, I can report that. The water resources, external audit, repeat audit finding, we're monitoring that. And that's too early to really close out because we are waiting for something to go through procurement on that. And the cone of silence investigation, looking at that, I think we've issued that one already. Pretty sure we did. I know that we had gotten some paperwork on that. I think we've done that. And then we didn't have any in the reporting stage as the 31st. So the next slide. Yep. So in calendar year 2021, we had a total of 28 projects that our office had completed and actually issued. And there's the dates on here. I'll just go over the ones that were the quarter. The COVID advisor services, that one we finished in the last quarter. Under cone of silence, we had 3 that we had completed. We didn't have any special review projects this year. Under the FollowUp Monitoring, we had, let me see, 1, 2, 3. We had 4 that we finished in the last quarter. For management assistance, we had 1 that we completed in that quarter. And then we had 2 administration projects that we completed in the last quarter. So you want to go to the next slide. So the follow-up monitoring, this starts on January 1 of 2021. It goes through December 31st of 21. And we started out with 12 risks that we were monitoring. And we cleared 10 during the year, but we also added 10, so we're still at 12 as of the 31st of the year, which really isn't a significant amount with the amount of audits that we're performing. So we're doing pretty good of adding and clearing those about the same time period. If you go to the next slide, Arabelle, for the fiscal year productivity, yes. So this slide looks a little bit different than how we had. We had a table before and it was just getting too cluttered. So what we did this year is instead we made a graph on that for the prior years, and we're just showing just this fiscal year. So we're showing the first quarter of this fiscal year. We're right now sitting at 11 projects that had been completed in the last quarter of 21. Calendar year 21, which is the first quarter, fiscal year quarter. So we're running about 1.67 audit-related projects per person, full-time employee, and 3.67 if you add all those other smaller items to that. So we're right on target this year, as we usually are. If you go to the next slide. So this is something that's new here. This is the audit plan. I don't think there were many changes, if any at all, from the time that you had recommended it until the board changed it. or approved it, excuse me, approved it. I don't believe that they had any changes. I don't recall them requesting anything in between that. But what you'll see is there's 16 projects listed on here, and 7 of those are in progress as of today. And of course, as the 31st, they wouldn't have been in progress, right? So that's about all I really have on my presentation. I don't know if you have any questions, concerns, comments. That's right.
On the code of silence investigations, are they with regard to vendors, suppliers?
Yeah, those are.
With
There we go. Yeah, yeah, those are the cone of silence. What that is you have somebody who is generally a supplier or a supplier or service provider. And as they're going through the procurement process, there's the cone of silence where they cannot communicate with somebody who would be making a decision on whether or not they would give them the business. So, so the way that works is if there's a communication, then that employee, commissioners, an executive would notify our department or the procurement department to say that they've been notified. But we find that a very high percentage of those are just administrative in nature, and there's nothing more to them. But we do have occasionally a couple a year where we do need to get a letter out to that business to just explain to them again the cone of silence. So that's why sometimes you'll see them on the audit plan as a project, but then they drop off as a monitoring.
okay.
Mm-hmm.
And does the audit function also look at the effects of in personnel issues, i.e. the water project that if we go, I'm just going to jump in.
That's right. That's
if
okay.
we go to a more technological function for meter reading,
Right.
it would seem that that would have a necessity to affect personnel or number of FTEs.
Right.
And is that part of the consideration of the audit function?
Yes, it will be. On this particular project, they do have a consultant, an outside consultant that's working with the department to make those implementations. So it would fall underneath that guidance of the consultant. But we would go in once the implementation is complete, we would go in and actually take a look at those types of risks, including, as well as some other ones. But on this one here, I think, basically what they had in place was just getting a little bit outdated. And so they need to bring in some new technologies. Yeah.
Well, that's understandable.
Right.
I can see that
And
the
impact.
risk for individuals who had been reading the meters
Right.
physically
Right.
may have changes to their job function.
Right. Yep. Yeah, and that happens a lot with technology, right? Yeah, where people get shifted into another position or what they're going to do with that. Yeah, and I think it's just too premature right now to know exactly the impact on that. But I would expect there to be some changes in job requirements in that or job duties. Yeah. Good questions. Yep. All right, so if there isn't anything else, so for the next quarter, for the objectives that are lie outside of our audit plan, we will be working with Luann Finley on that open position here on this committee. The requirement is no less than 3 members, and no more than 5. We have 4 right now, so we're in a good position. We did advertise at one time. We didn't get any applicants, but it was over the holidays, and that's always kind of a hard time to get applicants for some of these volunteer positions. So We don't know exactly what day that's going to be re-advertised, but I would think it's probably going to be later in February to mid-March. So we will try to hold our next meeting after we get those applicants. And Arabelle will be in touch with you on some of the dates for that. But that leads us to, the audit committee's goals. So what we will do is once we get some applicants, our office will do some pre-screening of those. And then we will summarize that for the committee. And then at the next meeting, hopefully the next meeting, you all will be able to review those applications and then make a recommendation for appointment to the Board of County Commissioners. And then that next meeting to the board, they would actually determine if they're going to appoint or not and who they would report, who they would do that. That was terrible English. But anyway, with the next slide. So I think that that's all we have for today. It was a very short meeting because, like I said, we expected to cover a couple more items, but we just weren't able to do that today. So anyway, we appreciate everybody coming to the meeting.
Thank you very much.
And so, Chair, if you would like to adjourn the meeting.
The meeting has been adjourned.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank
Thank you very
you.
much.
Thank you, Daphne. And it was at 2:51 p.m. Okay, great. That's it.